I found out somebody had built an entire HOA headquarters on my land the same way you find out your dog got sprayed by a skunk. Too late, and already smelling the consequences. It was around 6 in the morning, one of those cold Montana mornings where the fog hangs low over the grass, and every sound carries for miles. I was riding the south fence line on my old quarter-horse Jasper with a thermos of coffee sitting in the saddlebag when I spotted something that absolutely did not belong there. At first, I thought maybe I was still half asleep because sticking up in the middle of my pasture was this brand-new 2-story office building with shiny glass windows reflecting the sunrise like some kind of tech startup campus dropped out of the sky. There were fresh asphalt parking spaces, decorative shrubs, one of those fake stone signs out front that read Cedar Ridge Residential Association Administration Center. And parked beside it were 3 luxury SUVs still covered in morning dew like they'd been there overnight. Now here's the part that made my stomach turn. Sitting maybe 30 feet behind that building was my grandfather's old cottonwood tree. Same tree he planted back in the early 1950s after returning home from Korea. Same tree where my dad taught me how to rope calves. Same patch of dirt where my kids used to run around catching grasshoppers in mason jars. That wasn't abandoned land. That wasn't some forgotten property line nobody cared about. That was family ground. And these people had poured concrete right on top of it like history was just another inconvenience they could bulldoze over. I sat there for a second staring at the building, honestly trying to process whether this was some kind of county mistake or maybe a contractor gone stupid. But then I noticed the flags out front, the HOA logo, the landscaping, the expensive security cameras. No, this wasn't an accident. This was planned. See, Cedar Ridge Estates had been growing like a fungus next to my ranch for the last 4 years. Big custom homes, gated entrances, imported palm trees for some reason, even though we got snow 6 months a year, and residents who filed complaints if my cattle wandered too close to their view corridor. From day one, they wanted my land. They came offering checks with more zeros than I'd ever seen in my life. They sent smiling developers in pressed khakis talking about community expansion opportunities. They even tried warning me that my ranch operations might negatively impact surrounding property values. I told every single one of them the same thing. No, my family buried too much sweat into that land for me to hand it over, so somebody from California could build yoga patios and wine bars on it. Apparently, the HOA board got tired of hearing no. I rode Jasper right up to the front entrance, tied him to their polished steel handrail, which already annoyed me because I could tell it cost more than my first truck, and walked inside. Place smelled like fresh paint and overpriced air fresheners. There were marble floors, modern furniture, little fake plants sitting on every desk. Young receptionist looked up at me like I'd wandered in from another century. She smiled nervously and said, "Sir, can I help you?" I looked around slowly before saying, "Yeah, actually you can. You can explain why all of y'all are sitting in my living room." That got everybody's attention real quick. Couple employees stopped typing, somebody in the back dropped a coffee mug, and about 30 seconds later this guy comes hustling out of a corner office wearing a navy suit so tight it looked painted onto him. Mid-40s maybe, expensive watch, perfect teeth, smile so fake it could have been laminated. He stuck his hand out and said, "Good morning. I'm Randall Pierce, president of the Cedar Ridge Board. I think there may be some confusion here." Confusion. That word almost made me laugh. I asked him one simple question. "Who told you this land belonged to your HOA?" He started talking fast after that, saying they had purchased an expansion parcel through a development management company, claiming all the surveys had been verified during acquisition. He kept using words like easement, transition zone, municipal alignment, corporate gibberish designed to confuse people long enough for them to back down. But I didn't argue. That's what bothered him most. I just nodded slowly, looked around the building one more time, then said, "Well, one of us is about to have a very bad month." And then I walked out. The thing about people like Randall is they mistake calm for weakness. They think if you're not yelling, you must not understand what's happening. But the truth was, the second I saw that cottonwood tree behind their office, I already knew exactly whose land they were standing on, and deep down, I think he knew it too. Now before I tell you what happened next, you gotta understand something about HOAs and people who run them, because this kind of mess doesn't happen out of nowhere. According to standard procedure, before any major structure gets built, especially a commercial administrative building, there's supposed to be multiple layers of verification, land surveys, title checks, county boundary confirmations, environmental review, all of it. Somebody on that board either skipped those steps completely or figured nobody out in ranch country would push back hard enough to matter. And honestly, that's the psychological trap right there. See, folks in power get comfortable when they've been winning too long. Cedar Ridge spent years getting their way with contractors, residents, even local officials, so eventually they stopped asking permission and started assuming ownership. From a legal perspective, building on someone else's land without verified boundaries is about as reckless as driving blindfolded and hoping the road stays straight. Doesn't matter how expensive the project is, doesn't matter how polished the paperwork looks. Property law in America is brutally simple. If the land isn't yours, neither is the building sitting on top of it. And the lesson here is, arrogance makes people sloppy long before it makes them dangerous. The second Randall smiled at me instead of panicking, I knew exactly what kind of mistake they'd made, and I also knew I was about to enjoy fixing it. The second I got home, I pulled every property document I owned out of the old filing cabinet in my office, surveys, deeds, tax records, handwritten notes from my father, even the original county boundary adjustment paperwork filed back in 1998 after a flood shifted part of the creek line. Took me maybe 40 minutes to confirm what I already knew in my gut. That entire office building was sitting almost 60 feet inside my property boundary. Not inches. Not some tiny technical overlap lawyers argue about for 6 years in court. 60 feet. They hadn't just crossed the line. They practically parked a parade float on it. And the funniest part? The mistake came from pure laziness. Cedar Ridge had relied on an outdated county development map from before the boundary correction was updated into the digital record system. Somewhere along the way, somebody stopped checking details because they assumed money would smooth everything over. Usually, they're right. Most people see an HOA backed by developers and attorneys and immediately back down. But ranchers are stubborn by profession. You don't survive droughts, blizzards, busted fences, and cattle births at 2 in the morning by folding under pressure from a guy named Randall wearing Italian loafers. Now sure, I could have called a lawyer immediately. Hell, one phone call probably could have frozen the property, shut down operations, tied them up in court before lunch. But the more I thought about it, the more irritated I got remembering all those years Cedar Ridge treated my ranch like an inconvenience that needed to disappear. They filed noise complaints during cattle auctions. They complained about tractor lights at night during harvest season. One woman actually demanded I do something about the smell of livestock, like cows had suddenly become a new invention. So I figured if they wanted to experience ranch life so badly, maybe I should fully commit to the experience. Next morning, I drove down to the county office, sat across from an old zoning clerk named Martha, who'd known my family since I was a teenager, and filed paperwork for a temporary livestock containment expansion permit on the exact section of land surrounding the HOA office. Completely legal, completely documented. Martha looked over the paperwork, adjusted her glasses, and said, "You're about to do something funny, aren't you?" I told her, "Martha, funny isn't even the word for it." 3 days later, construction crews started building fencing around the HOA headquarters. And when I say around it, I mean tight. We wrapped that office building like a birthday present nobody wanted. Tall cedar fencing, reinforced posts, steel gate, chain lock. By Friday morning, there was exactly one way in and one way out of the Cedar Ridge Administration Center, through my pasture gate. Then came my favorite part. Saturday afternoon, I moved 43 head of cattle into the enclosure. Big black Angus cows, muddy from recent rain, curious as toddlers, and twice as destructive. By Monday morning, Cedar Ridge employees arrived at work looking like they'd accidentally driven into a livestock auction. One poor intern in khakis stepped out of his BMW and immediately froze because there was a 1,200-pound steer staring directly at him while chewing grass. I watched the whole thing from horseback up on the ridge with binoculars and coffee. Best entertainment I'd had in years. The complaints started almost instantly. First came emails, then calls, then threats. Randall called me around 9 that morning trying to sound calm, saying the livestock situation was creating unsafe working conditions. I told him, "Randall, according to county records, your office appears to be located inside an active ranch operation. Livestock tends to happen in those." He didn't appreciate that answer. By Tuesday, things got even better. Somebody from the HOA board stepped in cow manure while wearing white designer shoes and apparently had a complete emotional collapse in the parking lot. One resident posted photos online asking why their HOA fees were funding an office located inside a petting zoo. Another homeowner discovered the entire structure had been built without proper boundary verification, and suddenly the neighborhood Facebook page turned into a digital riot. People were furious, not because they cared about me exactly, but because nobody likes discovering the people managing their money might be idiots. And that's when Cedar Ridge's real problem started. See, the board had never actually told homeowners where the land came from. Most residents assumed the office had been built on purchased commercial property. Once the truth got out, once people realized the board had built a multi-million-dollar structure on disputed land without proper confirmation, panic spread fast. Suddenly residents started asking dangerous questions. How much money was spent? Who approved construction? Were reserve funds used? Was insurance going to cover any of this? You could practically hear the lawyers waking up all across town. Meanwhile, I kept escalating things in the most legal way possible. I added water troughs near the entrance, brought in hay feeders beside the parking lot, installed signs reading, "Caution, active livestock area." Every single thing perfectly compliant with county agricultural use regulations. From a legal perspective, there was almost nothing they could do because the moment they built on my property, they voluntarily inserted themselves into my ranch operation. One afternoon, I rode down there to check fences and found two HOA employees trying to spray air freshener around the walkway while a cow scratched its backside against the building's decorative stone wall. Nearly broke me laughing. But underneath all the comedy, Randall was unraveling. You could see it in his face every time he spotted me. First week, he still carried himself like a corporate executive. By week 2, he looked like a man realizing his career might be ending in a field covered with manure. We crossed paths near the gate one morning, and he tried one last intimidation play. Told me their attorneys were reviewing all available legal remedies. I remember looking at him for a long second before saying, "Randall, your lawyers can bill by the hour all they want, but every minute this drags on, your residents see cows where their money's supposed to be going." That hit him harder than yelling ever could. Because deep down he knew the truth. This wasn't becoming a legal disaster anymore. It was becoming a humiliation spectacle. And rich neighborhoods fear embarrassment more than lawsuits. Then came the local news. Somebody leaked drone footage online showing luxury office staff weaving through cattle just to enter the building, and overnight the story exploded. One station called it the Wild West HOA standoff. Another headline read, "Luxury development outplayed by ranch owner." Reporters started showing up near my property asking for interviews. I didn't say much, just tipped my hat and told them, folks should always know whose land they're standing on. That clip ended up everywhere. By the third week, Cedar Ridge residents were openly demanding board resignations. Emergency meetings got scheduled. Homeowners threatened lawsuits against the HOA itself for negligence and misuse of funds. And right in the middle of all that chaos, Randall finally came to my front door. I still remember the look on his face when I opened it. Gone was the polished smile. Gone was the confidence. Gone was the corporate charm. Man looked exhausted. Tie crooked. Eyes bloodshot. He asked if we could talk privately. I invited him onto the porch, poured myself coffee, didn't offer him any. He started with an apology that sounded painfully rehearsed, then moved quickly into business. Said Cedar Ridge was prepared to purchase the disputed section of land at a significantly increased value. I actually laughed out loud at that. Not because the offer was low. Honestly, it was probably more money than the land itself was worth. But because after all this, he still thought the problem was about price. I leaned back in my chair and said, "Randall, you still don't get it. My grandfather built this ranch with his hands. My father died protecting it from debt during the 80s. You people walked onto it like history was just empty space waiting for a Starbucks." He didn't say anything after that, just stared at the porch floor. So I gave him two options. Option 1, tear down the building completely, restore the land, replace damaged soil, reseed the pasture, cover legal costs, and issue a formal statement admitting fault to every homeowner in Cedar Ridge. Option 2, keep sharing office space with 43 cattle indefinitely. Silence. Long silence. Then finally he asked, "If we agree to everything, will you remove the livestock?" I told him, Soon as the building's gone. 3 days later, demolition crews rolled in. And let me tell you, watching excavators tear apart that office felt strangely emotional. Not because I enjoyed destruction, honestly I didn't, but because every crashing wall sounded like a reminder that some things still can't be bought. They hauled away concrete for almost a week. Landscaping crews replanted grass across the damaged section. Fresh soil got brought in. Fencing came down. By the end of the month, the pasture looked almost untouched except for faint tire marks fading beneath new grass. One evening near sunset, I rode Jasper back out to the cottonwood tree and just sat there quietly listening to the wind move through the branches. Same land, same sky, same ranch my family fought to keep for generations. Only difference now was there weren't any glass office windows blocking the view. But I did leave one thing behind. Right near the fence line facing Cedar Ridge Estates, I planted a wooden sign that read, "Private ranch property. Please verify boundaries before building." Funny thing is, nobody's complained about my cattle ever since. You know, after everything settled down, after the lawyers stopped circling and the reporters moved on to the next shiny disaster, a lot of people asked me the same question: why didn't you just sue them immediately? And honestly, I could have. Probably would have been faster too. But that wouldn't have taught anybody anything. See, the real issue was never just the building. It was the mindset behind it. Somewhere along the way, a whole lot of people started believing money automatically outranks history, that if a ranch or a family business stands in the way of expansion, eventually the smaller guy will fold under pressure. Cedar Ridge believed that too. They thought persistence would wear me down. Then when that failed, they convinced themselves rules were flexible if the people breaking them wore expensive enough clothes. This is a psychological trap powerful organizations fall into all the time. They surround themselves with yes people for so long they stop hearing the word no as a real answer. And once that happens, arrogance slowly replaces caution. From a legal perspective, this whole mess could have financially destroyed that HOA if it dragged into court. Homeowners could have faced special assessments, insurance battles, lawsuits against the board members personally, all because a few people stopped respecting boundaries, literally and figuratively. The lesson here is simple: property lines matter, not just on paper, but emotionally. To some people, land is just acreage, numbers on a spreadsheet, future profit. To others, it's memory, it's family, it's identity. And when you disrespect that, you're not just crossing a fence, you're stepping into somebody's life story. I think that's why this situation hit such a nerve online. Deep down, people are tired of watching powerful groups assume they can rewrite rules without consequences. Sometimes they can, sometimes they can't. In this case, 43 cattle ended up becoming the world's weirdest legal argument, and somehow also the most effective one. But I'll tell you one thing for sure. Every now and then I still catch Cedar Ridge residents slowing down near that old wooden sign when they drive past the ranch. Some laugh. Some look embarrassed. Some probably hate my guts. Doesn't really matter to me, because the sign isn't there to humiliate anybody anymore. It's there as a reminder. Boundaries exist for a reason, and if you ignore them long enough, eventually somebody's going to make you walk through manure to learn the lesson.